When Lawrence Wong, a man of Hainanese descent, became Singapore's fourth prime minister on May 15, 2024, the question of whether Lee Hsien Loong would have his own son succeed him appeared to be settled. However, the shadow of the Lee family continues to loom large over Wong's ruling team. The family's immense and enduring influence in modern Singapore makes one suspect that a Lee family-run Singapore will eventually make a comeback. After all, when it comes to serving as a transitional leader in Singaporean politics, Lawrence Wong is not the first. Lee Kuan Yew's handover of power to his son, Lee Hsien Loong, was itself a brilliant gambit played in plain sight, masterfully disguised by the art of rhetoric. Singapore is not North Korea. Even if Lee Kuan Yew had wanted a dynastic succession, it was not something he could do openly. To understand whether the Lee family's rule will return, we must first understand where the idea of a Lee family-run Singapore came from in the first place. In the 1970s, East Asia had two unparalleled political stars in small nations. One was Park Chung-hee of South Korea, and the other was Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. Both led their respective countries through miraculous economic leaps during that decade, and both gained immense political prestige as a result. However, their fates diverged sharply. Park was assassinated by his own security chief in 1979, while Lee Kuan Yew continued his rule over Singapore. By the 1980s, Lee Kuan Yew, having long been at the helm, began to face the issue of succession. As early as 1984, he clearly signaled his desire for his son to take over. In a government reshuffle that year, then Minister of Defense Goh Chok Tong was appointed First Deputy Prime Minister, a position second only to Lee Kuan Yew. Had nothing else happened, he would have been widely seen as Lee's successor. However, at the very same time, Lee Kuan Yew's son, Lee Hsien Loong, retired from the Singapore Armed Forces as a 32-year-old brigadier general. He immediately ran in the general election, won a parliamentary seat with a high vote count, and was quickly appointed Minister of State for Defense and for Trade and Industry. The simultaneous occurrence of these two events created a massive public outcry. Neither the Singaporean public nor the opposition parties believed Goh Chok Tong was the true successor. Instead, they saw him as a regent paving the way for Lee Kuan Yew's son. The wave of public opinion forced him to respond immediately. Argument, which seems full of logical traps today, was that being his son was actually a liability for Lee Hsien Loong's political career. He claimed that if his own son were to fail politically, it would be a huge humiliation for himself and for the People's Action Party. In reality, these statements were a brilliant gambit built upon Lee Kuan Yew's immense political authority. First, he successfully shifted the public's focus from the question of lineage to the question of capability. Once Lee Hsien Loong eventually took over, if he succeeded, it would not only prove Lee Kuan Yew's exceptional judgment, but also demonstrate that his son had risen on his own merit. This would, in turn, reinforce the legitimacy of both Lee Kuan Yew and the system he created. On the other hand, if Lee Hsien Loong were to fail, Lee Kuan Yew had already framed it as a humiliation for the PAP. This was a clear signal to the entire ruling elite. Supporting Lee Hsien Loong was not just about supporting Lee Kuan Yew's political legacy, but also about protecting their own political positions. By tying his son's fate to the PAP, he fundamentally secured Lee Hsien Loong's political future. With this logic established, Lee Kuan Yew repeated this narrative in numerous public settings between 1985 and 1990. Whether in an interview with the New York Times or at a PAP convention, he was like a broken record, stressing that if his son were to become prime minister, it would only be because of his outstanding abilities. But the outside world was not entirely fooled. In August 1990, just before Lee Kuan Yew stepped down, 3 foreign journalists conducted an in-depth interview with him. During the conversation, a Western reporter asked bluntly if Goh Chok Tong was just a seat warmer, a transitional figure meant to pave the way for his eldest son, Brigadier General Lee Hsien Loong. Faced with this question, Lee Kuan Yew, besides once again reiterating his son's capabilities, began to argue from a different angle. He deflected by saying, "If I were to fix it, if I had to have a seat warmer, I would have chosen a man who would be more pliable, who would listen to me. Goh Chok Tong is not that kind of a person. He has a mind of his own." This response temporarily silenced the journalists. The reality, however, was that over a decade later, Lee Hsien Loong took over smoothly. Lee Kuan Yew's 1990 statement was, in essence, an extremely clever deception. Factually, Goh Chok Tong was indeed an ideal candidate to ensure a smooth transition for Lee Hsien Loong. If not the best choice, then certainly one of the best. A key reason the Western journalists didn't press further was their incomplete understanding of Singapore's political ecosystem, especially the role Goh played within the PAP. A look at Goh's resume shows he was a bureaucrat handpicked and promoted by Lee Kuan Yew himself. Recruited from the private sector, he rose entirely through the PAP system. Goh never formed his own deep-rooted faction within the party. His sole loyalty was to his mentor, Lee Kuan Yew. Goh held Lee in the highest personal esteem and would never have subverted the path Lee had laid out for his son. There was another reason. Compared to Lee Kuan Yew, Goh had always projected a gentler, more approachable public image. This meant that even with power in his hands, he was unlikely to risk his political image by abruptly changing the course set by his predecessor. Furthermore, Lee Kuan Yew put in a double insurance policy. In the 1990 cabinet, Lee Kuan Yew remained as the sole senior minister, while Lee Hsien Loong was appointed as one of 2 deputy prime ministers. Even if Goh held immense power legally, this structure made it impossible for him to bypass the Lee family and act independently. In the end, Goh Chok Tong played the part of a near-perfect transitional leader. When Lee Hsien Loong became Singapore's 3rd Prime Minister on August 12, 2004, Lee Kuan Yew's political gamble had paid off completely. During Goh's 14 years in office, Lee Hsien Loong held a series of core positions, including Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, and Chairman of the Monetary Authority of Singapore. He not only led several major economic reforms, but also earned significant political capital during crises like the Asian financial crisis. At the same time, Goh's 14-year term formally severed the direct line of succession from father to son. Lee Hsien Loong's rise appeared to be a handover from a respected, non-Lee leader rather than a direct inheritance from his father. Although those who work backward from the outcome see this as a clear-as-day power play, if you give all the opportunities for achievement to Lee Hsien Loong, then all the credit will inevitably be his. For many Singaporeans, as long as the country continued to develop, they didn't care whether a Goh or Lee was in charge. Ultimately, Lee Hsien Loong's succession validated the suspicions the world had about his father 2 decades earlier. But because of Lee Kuan Yew's brilliant gambit, no one dared to hold him accountable. When power passed to Lee Hsien Loong, so did a new question. How would he pass power on to a 3rd generation of the Lee family? In reality, it's wrong to speak of a Lee family comeback because they never left. In Lee Kuan Yew's era, the term Lee Family Singapore was an attack on his immense personal political authority. But in Lee Hsien Loong's era, the term is rooted in the logical reality of Singaporean society. Beyond the Prime Minister himself, Lee Hsien Loong's brother, Lee Hsien Loong, is the former head of Singtel and the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore, as well as the former chairman of Fraser and Neave, a subsidiary of Temasek Holdings. Lee Hsien Loong's wife, Ho Ching, served as the CEO of Temasek Holdings from 2004 to 2021. His staunchest ally, Wong Kan Seng, is the former Chief Investment Officer of GIC, Government of Singapore Investment Corporation, country's other key sovereign wealth fund. The current president of Singapore, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, is also Lee's Cambridge alumnus and political ally. The list goes on. After 2 generations of the Lee family's stewardship, nearly every key figure in Singapore's political and business circles has some connection, direct or indirect, to the family. From the perspective of maintaining the Lee family's status as Singapore's top political dynasty, choosing Lawrence Wong was a strategic decision to minimize risk and maximize gain. Objectively, Wong has too many similarities to Goh Chok Tong. His background is clean. He is a career technocrat from the public service sector with no independent power base. All his achievements and authority derive from the PAP system. His consensus-driven leadership style also serves as a buffer after Lee Hsien Loong's more authoritarian era. For the Lee family, which currently lacks a clear third-generation candidate to support, Wong is now cast in the role of a long-term frontman. Although Lee Hsien Loong is no longer prime minister, he is, in a move identical to his father's, remotely steering the prime minister's office from his position as senior minister. He needs time to pave the way for a third-generation Lee family representative, and he needs time to find the right person for the job. And even if that eventual successor no longer bears the Lee name, the political dynasty founded by Lee Kuan Yew will inevitably remain the most important cornerstone of Singapore's political ecosystem.